Here.
Representative Jennings, Representative Nemec,
Here.
Representative Oakley. Here. Representative Provenza. Here. Representative Rodriguez Williams. Here. And Chairman Washit.
Here. So good morning, everyone in the room. Appreciate you being here. We have three important bills we're trying to get through this morning. We'll start with Senate File 32. Prohibiting drones over penal institutions. Director Shannon, if you would come forward, please. Committee, this was a interim joint judiciary bill. For those of you who were not with us over the interim, we had quite a bit of testimony about the use of drones in potentially dropping contraband into a prison yard and therefore jeopardizing security within the institution. So if you look at your bill, we'll be talking about the engrossed version, the blue version on your desk, Senate File 32. Begins like most of our bills with a long list of definitions. And then we go into the what do you call it? Exceptions. Does not include an unmanned aircraft system used by the United States government, does not include a satellite orbiting the earth, does not include an aircraft system used by the state for state business, or an unmanned aircraft system used by law enforcement or emergency medical service, hazardous material response team, disaster management, etc. Except as authorized by a person in charge of the penal institution or correctional facility. No person shall intentionally, so we have an intentional element, photograph, surveil, broadcast, or otherwise record a penal institution or correctional facility through the use of an unmanned aircraft. Convey or attempt to convey contraband into the facility, deliver or attempt to deliver deadly weapons into the facility. Any person who violates this commits a misdemeanor punishable by not more than 1 year incarceration and a fine of $2,000 or both. Any person who violates the deadly weapons section is guilty of a felony. 10 years in prison with $10,000 fine. Person who uses the aircraft system under one or more of the exclusions specified shall provide reasonable notice of the intended use of the unmanned aircraft system to the institution. The person in charge of the institution may take or authorize the use of reasonable actions to prevent or stop the use of unmanned aircraft systems operating in violation. And the Department of Corrections shall promulgate rules specifying reasonable actions of a person in charge of a penal institution may take to stop or prevent a violation. And the Department of Corrections shall promulgate any rules necessary to implement the act. So there's our bill. Director Shannon, if you would be so kind as to give us some background as to why this bill is being brought to us.
Mr. Chairman, House Judiciary Committees. My name is Dan Shannon, Director for the Department of Corrections. Chairman, committee members, our technology, though it's very productive, there's also another end of the spectrum. There's some negativity. And across our nation, a lot of institutions, penal institutions, are having problems with drones. We've had, within our department, we've only had 2 incidents, but it doesn't matter. If you look back in 2020, the state of Georgia had over 300 incidents. So it's something that I'm trying to get ahead of as we work every day to ensure safety. With your permission, sir, I will discuss the bill and how it interacts with the department. As you stated, it was an interim topic. It's something that also is very similar to 22 other states, similar bills. Drones are forbidden over Federal Bureau of Prisons. The bill prohibits, as you said, the use of unauthorized manned aircraft systems across penal institutions. And I only can speak for the state facilities. It would also include county jails and for sheriffs across our state. It provides the exceptions. So it's not one-sided for satellites, U.S. government, state business, emergency preparedness, incident commanders, things of that nature. The bill allows exceptions as the warden or the CEO of the institution can authorize uses of drones. It also provides criminal penalties for conveyance or attempt. Here in Wyoming, we do have statutes for contraband as well as introduction of a deadly weapon, but it now provides it for an unmanned aircraft. It requires the Department of Corrections to promulgate rules, which we have. I have prepared a draft and we'll present it as we do. Lastly, there was amendment by the Senate Judiciary, and that was on page 6, lines 2 through 5, making the act effective immediately upon the completion of the necessary work. And Mr. Chairman, I may report there's no fiscal note with this act. We, as the Department of Corrections, we struggle every day to ensure contraband, such as cell phones, weapons, fentanyl. All those things pose threats to human life. There's 3 forms. I see it from my chair. I see there's 3 forms of interactions with drones, unauthorized drones across our institutions. It's intentional disruption. We have no way of knowing when the drone is in the air, who's friend or foe. So at that time, we must secure our facilities, which becomes disruptive. The second would be for surveillance and reconnaissance. This jeopardizes our emergency safety of our staff, our inmates, as well as can re-victimize those who have already been injured in our society. And the last is, this is strictly a bill of safety. I understand my responsibility for those who are confined, and that is built on public trust. So I carefully, and I think about bills that are being passed and for future references, there'll be different directors and things, but I think our policies are pretty clear. Regarding the FAA, it does not permit a manned aircraft under 500 feet over a penal institution. They've blocked out mapping over our institutions in Wyoming. It's kind of ironic. They passed rules that they're not permitted, unmanned drones are not permitted to fly over federal prisons, but regarding states, they left that alone. So it's determined for each state to make that decision. The FAA does not permit any form of unmanned aircraft flying over their penal institutions under federal grounds. As I mentioned, we've promulgated rules in which I will make public. The department is exempt from following with those rules. However, I will make those public, and the operating procedures will keep within our emergency preparedness. Mr. Chairman, lastly, I made myself some notes. I understand Google Earth photos flying over by satellite, but one thing you don't see when you have a live feed, you have an opportunity to discover who's in the yard, what time they're in the yards, where they're located, staff, inmates, as well as there's reasons how certain portions of our institutions are identified by numbers for emergency responders and things of that nature. And if you have a live feed of that, or you're taking photos of individuals, then that's being placed public. We have a media policy. As I testified during the interim, for the first time within our department, I opened up all our facilities to Wyoming media this year. They could tour where they well want to see. It's just certain security areas you don't take. You can go in, but you just don't take photos. I wouldn't hand the blueprints out. So, Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Director Shannon? Director, one of the topics that came up during the interim discussions were potentials for First Amendment challenges. When the news media has a drone up near a prison, maybe not over the yard, but adjacent to it, shooting video of activities at the prison. And the question was, how is that any different than if we're sitting on top of a hill near a prison yard with a telephoto lens? Does it make a difference whether the news media is watching the yard from a hilltop or from a drone? You want to comment on the First Amendment concerns?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, certainly as far as the First Amendment concerns, they have, I believe the media has the right to inquire, to view. My only question is there has to be a balance of public safety. Way our institutions are laid throughout the state, I don't have a concern. I don't think we've ever said no to the media. There may be an incident where we indicated you can't bring a camera in here. We're not going to go in our control centers and take camera photos and things of that nature, but you're welcome to go in and look. So I think under regarding the First Amendment, access is required and they would have it. So the example would be if you had bad things are going to happen in corrections in the business long enough, in the event that you had a disturbance during that incident, I at that moment, as an incident commander, I wouldn't stop and say, this is what we need to do. But there would be updates, and at the conclusion that those would all be public documents. So, I mean, the media is permitted to be on phone lists with inmates, staff members. Inmates have folks, the media assist with their own websites and social media. I've never had an issue with that.
Just to follow up, Director, if let's say we had a riot at a Wyoming prison and the news media wanted to film that, and they put a drone up adjacent to the prison, not over the yard, but adjacent to the yard, and we're shooting images, would this bill prohibit that, or could they film your prison from airspace adjacent to the prison?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding of the bill that if they're adjacent, then the bill doesn't have the impact. It's only over prison grounds.
Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Shannon. So, and just to kind of piggyback on what he said, but I think maybe kind of wanted on page 3, line 17, it says, except as authorized by a person in charge of the penal institution or correctional facility, no person shall intentionally, and it goes through and describes what they shall do. So if there was a situation where a media outlet were to contact one of your facilities and say, hey, we're wanting to do this brief or whatever, is there a way we could fly a drone over? At that point, that permission could be given if they worked with the correctional facility, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harrelson, that is correct.
Representative Shestak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Shannon, thank you for being here. I want to question, you said that in response to the chairman's question that this would not prohibit somebody on adjacent land from flying. I'm not sure that's true. I'm looking at page 3, lines 21 to 23. Nobody shall intentionally photograph, surveil, broadcast, or otherwise record a penal institution or correctional facility through the use of an unmanned aircraft system. It doesn't talk about where you are physically in the air. You could be on adjacent land doing these things. You could be photographing, surveilling, broadcasting, or recording from adjacent land using the air. So I'm not sure when you said that adjacent land is not covered, I think it is. What, do you agree?
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Chestik, thank you for the question. It is correct. The filming of certain parts of the institution is a safety risk, but my understanding of the bill, if you look on page 1, lines 3 through 6, where it talks about, let me see, unmanned aircraft system specified with Department of Corrections to take reasonable actions, the institution, private division, I take that as being on institutional grounds. I take that as the location of the institutions. Trespassing over or on penal institutions, line 4 and 5.
Follow up, Representative.
Yes, briefly, and I appreciate that's in the title, but it's not in the body of the bill. The title is not effective. The body of the bill is what has effect. So maybe we need to find an amendment to solve that problem later on.
Further questions for the director? Saying none, thank you. Please hang around. We might
Sure,
have you back up.
Sure, Mr. Chairman.
Who else would like to testify? Any other state agencies on this bill? And who else? Anybody else want to testify on Senate File 32 for any reason? Anybody on Zoom land? Wow. Given our content last week talking about drones. I thought we'd have a bigger commentary this morning. So with no one else in the room to talk about Senate File 32, I'll close public comment, bring it to the committee. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Rodriguez Williams, second by Oakley. Proposed amendments or discussion? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've pointed out an important potential flaw in the bill, which is why I voted no during interim, was this concern of adjacent issues and the freedom of the press. And so I'm willing to bring this bill to the floor if we can have a discussion about potentially amending it either sometime between now and either committee of the whole or second reading. Because I think if we can bring in this language of trespassing over or in penal institutions, then I think we're taking care of the issue that would be at hand. Going back to the letter that we got from, I believe, the National Press Photographers Association, that was their concern. So if we have ideas of how to do that now, that would be great. If we don't, I would strongly encourage that we work together to figure out that amendment for the floor.
Other discussion. Representative Harrelson.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman, not really discussion, but I believe we could probably on page 3, line 19, after intentionally, it would read, except as authorized by a person in charge of the penal institution or correctional facility, no person shall intentionally trespass over or in a penal institute with, what are we actually using? The unmanned aircraft? Is that what unmanned aircraft system? And then that would cover, if I'm correct, would cover the photograph, surveil, broadcast, otherwise record. So it would hold us to that. So let me sorry for you guys, I'm going to get my head wrapped around this and make it a little more clear. So after intentionally, we would say trespass over or in a penal institution with an unmanned aircraft system.
So moved in a second.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have an amendment proposed. Director Shannon, can I get you to come back up for just one? I want to get this right. Don't normally reopen public comment, but I'm trying to wrap my head around the security concerns of an institution. Does it matter whether it's being surveilled from 50 feet left of the prison or above the prison?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for allowing me to come up and make a comment after you started your bill. To address Representative Harrelson's question, the Department of Corrections' main concern is to bring contraband or a weapon onto the grounds. I have much less of a concern of surveillance or what they're seeing. So my main concern is if they're flying over the grounds where they could drop, in our incidents, we've had them drop tobacco, but tomorrow it may be fentanyl or a weapon. So my concern is the actual drone over the institutional grounds.
So Director, if we were to delete all of the language in section I, lines 21 through 23 on page 3, it speaks to photographing, surveilling, broadcasting, or otherwise recording an institution. Would you have a concern with doing away with that?
Mr. Chairman, I would. I think that's the intent of the bill as well. But I wanted to identify if a drone's flying, as Representative Chestik said, adjacent or represent, I don't have a concern what they're seeing. As you described earlier, if there's an incident at the facility, that the public has a right to know what's going on at that facility. My main concern is safety is if the drone is flying over. Now, if the drone's flying over, you could very well have the drone fly over, take a number of images and then take off. So I would have a concern to keep those lines in.
But Director, I think your earlier testimony was being able to monitor guard movements, inmate movements, and so I'm a little concerned that even a drone 50 feet off your property with a proper lens would be able to monitor which inmates are moving at what time of day and those sorts of things. Would that not be a security concern?
Mr. Chairman, it is. I just don't know how I could control that.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think we're striking the balance and I think we're doing a good job. But so what I mean by that, like to respond to what the good chairman just said, usually what you're looking at with these penal institutions, they're not going to be able to be 50 feet away from seeing from the actual operations, right? So, which I think is why the director was okay with, with balancing the concern that Representative Chestick and Provenza had and narrow this to trespassing over or in, because we do have the balance of, First Amendment and drone flying along with the safety. But so I think with Representative Haraldson's amendment, we can kind of do a really good balance of all of that. And it sounds like the director's comfortable with it, just weighing in personally, I'm comfortable with it. I think it's a good balance.
Okay, so we have an amendment. Debbie, did you get that? Do you need to repeat? You're good. Can you read it to us how you heard it?
On line 19, with the word intentionally, trespass over or in a penal institution with an unmanned aircraft system.
Representative Harrelson, is that what you're?
Mr. Chairman, could we add grounds in there as well? That way people can't sit there and go, well, I wasn't over the wall of it, but they can't fly it on the property of the penal institution was my concept.
Institution property or ground after institution. So Representative Harrelson, so you're asking to have trespass over or in a penal institution
Or grounds
or grounds
with an unmanned aircraft system.
Debbie, you have that? Representative Chestick, discussion?
Yeah, I think you need to add the word to the end of that. So 2: and then photograph, convey, deliver. So just add the word to, TO.
And where would you put the word to?
The very end, right before the colon. I'm the grammar police here.
Okay,
Yes.
so we have a motion and a second. Motion was by Harrelson, second by Provenza. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I just believe that it's important to make a clarity here that if I own property directly next to one of our facilities and I'm out flying my drone, there has to be a protection for me to be able to do that. And this would give that. Where on the same side, it would give you guys the protection where if I start straying over your property and over a facility or an institution, we then have an issue. And I think that this is a good protection and a good balance drawn. And so I think that the grounds or the institution, because what you don't want is there to be a gray area where we're flying 20 feet off the edge of a wall and not, well, I wasn't over the institution technically. Well, you were over the grounds. So.
Very good. With that, all in favor of Representative Harrelson's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The amendment has passed. Any further amendments? Debbie, you want to call the roll on Senate File 32?
Representative Cragel.
Aye.
Representative Chestick.
Aye.
Representative Harrelson. Representative Jennings. Representative Nemec.
Aye.
Representative Oakley.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Aye.
Chairman Washut.
Aye.
Total of 9 ayes and 0 noes.
With that, Senate File 32 has passed. Representative Chestick.
Just make a note, we forgot to take up the Landon amendment on effective date, but we can probably do that at the first committee of Howell reading.
Representative Chestick, would you bring that amendment on the floor for the committee of the whole, please?
I can do that, yes.
Very good. We can. Representative Oakley, just comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the good representative. I certainly don't mind, but you know, most things we wait till July 1, and I haven't heard that this is the most emergent thing that we need to, so I guess either way, in my opinion, on whether we change the date past July, move it up earlier than July 1.
You know, that language is already in my engrossed version on page 6. The act is effective immediately. So I think it's there. I think they may have added that on the Senate side.
Yeah, so it's done.
Okay, so it's there. Very good. Who wants to carry this bill on the floor? Representative Harold's? Representative Haroldson will fly this bill on the floor. Very good. Senate File 35, crosswalks. Thank you, Director. Appreciate you being here this morning. Senate File 35. This might be the last of our joint judiciary interim bills. This deals with school crosswalks and pedestrian crossings. This bill began with a concern after a child was struck and killed at a school crosswalk here in the capital city. The mother of that child came before the committee in the interim, made a pretty poignant request that something be done. And we discussed various options and we landed on this one, which was to put some funding forward to build some crosswalks at some of the most hazardous school crossing areas that our students have to pass in the state of Wyoming. And so probably the most important part of this bill is on page 1, lines 11 and 12, where we appropriate $10 million for the construction of crosswalks, overpass type projects, according to priorities created by the Department of Transportation. Page 2, the department is called upon to expend and distribute the funds appropriated to cities, towns, counties, agencies, political subdivisions in order to improve the safety of those crossovers. The planning, design, construction is addressed. Improvements to existing crosswalks are added. So overall, I think the whole point of this bill is to try and make it safer for children to get to school. And that's our bill. So I think we have some state agency people here this morning. Director Reiner, you want to bring your team forward?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director of YDOT. Depending on how technical you want to get with questions, I did bring some experts. To my right is Mr. Tom Dehoff, who is our Assistant Chief Engineer for Operations. So today, actually, he's thinking about snow plows and the roads that are out there. But crosswalks all fits in his bailiwick. And then to my left is Mr. Joel Mina, who's our State Traffic Engineer. So when we start talking about specific requirements on crosswalks, that he's the expert. Mr. Chairman, I probably, obviously this was as an interim bill. And I think just a couple comments, just maybe to set the stage for what we think about this is one, you articulated the history well. This certainly started, during the interim. And it didn't start as let's give money to YDOT. It started as let's increase the penalty. And so as we think about safety on roads, as we think about crosswalks, we always think about 3 E's. We think about educate, we think about enforce, and we think about engineering. I will just share that this bill then really has gone from really enforcement to engineering, because engineering is sort of the mechanics of the infrastructure, which is good. We did have another incident last year in Lander. I don't know if you remember when that occurred, but there is a young lady who was actually on the way to school, and she went to a crosswalk and she did not push the button. And she started going across the crosswalk, and a car was coming, and the crosswalk didn't sense her and it sensed the car, and she was actually struck. Thank you. She, thankfully she was not killed. But it was another, incident on our transportation system, and we track those incidents closely. Based on sort of those two incidences, we did do something in the education, the first E realm, and we won't play it for you, but we did submit it to you. It should be in your packet. You should have received it electronically. It's about a 3-minute, 30-second video about hey, here's the different type of crosswalks that are out there, and here's how you use them. Make sure you push the button, look both ways, make sure you got eye contact. And that's important to us. That video was sent to all schools across our state to try and push out this message of, hey, listen, safety is our concern on these roads. And here's some education. So that's out there, because I really, from the department standpoint, we're pretty interested in a collective, collaborative, synchronized approach, for safety on our roadways. And we do think about those 3 E's. There wasn't an enforcement bill actually that did not survive. And it really had to do, it was brought by one of your body and dealt with some video cameras on crosswalks, and we'll see whether that ever comes back, but that's another idea on enforcement. So this one certainly is talk about engineering. Mr. Chairman, we did send some information in terms of a handout. I'm not sure I sense a need really to go through that today, but I think just in the interest of maybe discussion points on the floor for you, there might be some facts in there that you might be interested in. So if you should have, if I'll just flip to page 2, there is a lot of laws on the book right now in terms of, rights and responsibilities and duties, both for pedestrians and for vehicle operators. As we study this during the interim, after really invited us to this discussion, we don't sense any requirement to change statute in sort of terms of whose responsibility for what. It's well laid out in statute, and didn't sense any need for that. If you flip over to page 3, there's just at the bottom right is really sort of a chart about, hey, here's the total pedestrians that were hit in 21, because when we put this data together, that's what we had. And I think what I call you out there is sort of the age groups. You see that the highest strike is under 14, and then again from 55 to 64. And so you sort of look at that data and say, that's who's getting hit. In 21, we did have 12 fatal injuries in terms of pedestrians. Now, remember, in this case, a pedestrian is, it could be somebody walking or roller skates or a wheelchair. It's not on a mechanized form of transportation. And so it's a little bit broader sometimes than people might think. We, in WIDOT, we do maintain 915 crosswalks across the state, but that is, most crosswalks, bless you, do not belong to us. They actually belong to municipalities and to counties, right? Now we're certainly, the State Department of Transportation, but we don't own most of the crosswalks and the traffic signals. If I just flip you over to the next page of data, I think what I would point out on the bottom chart is that most of the pedestrian locations, as we observed from 18 to 22, is a 5 years worth of data there, is was actually not hit in crosswalks. You see 152 were killed in the roadway or hit in the roadway. And then the next one down, actually, the next incident was at marked crosswalks. That's sort of this discussion of, hey, let's educate on how to use those. And then you can see what the rest of the data is in terms of where the actual strikes were. If you flip over the page, and I think one of the questions that always comes up is, well, where is this occurring across the state? Because it really lends into what crosswalks are you going to work on their department. And what you see there is, like you might expect, is that the largest number of crashes certainly is in our populated areas. So you see Casper and Cheyenne lead the pack. And then you see, the next really size down is Gillette and Rock Springs and Sheridan. So sort of as you might expect. Mr. Chairman, I think the rest of, you can page through the rest at your leisure, but it walks through, there's different type of solutions at crosswalks. And one solution doesn't fit all. And that's what we pay our traffic engineers to work through. Our preference is that communities sort of think through crosswalks and think through pedestrian safety before we get into issues. Here's a great example here in this community. There's a new development to the the southeast called Sweetgrass, and it's there south of LCCC. And if you drive by there today, what you see is an underpass that goes between the development and the college, and goes from a bunch of homes where young men and women will be, and there's a crosswalk there's an underpass underneath the road. And that was done in the development and in the planning phase, which is the right time to address this. That has not happened, unfortunately, in other communities across our state, and we're dealing with it. Some of those areas that we're dealing with, you see on page 6, there's a lot of discussion around the state about crosswalks. Cody is one that we certainly have been dealing significantly with on a major road that's there. I think the rest of the discussion then becomes, hey, YDOT, if we kicked you some money, how would you administer it? And really what I tell you is that today, certainly alternative transportation programs is a priority of this current federal administration. And so we get about $4 million a year, which actually is a doubling of what it was from the prior administrations, to deal with items like bike routes or walkways or crosswalks or really road type structures that support alternate forms of transportation. And so when we were asked during the interim, hey, how would you administer this? Our recommendation to the committee was, hey, we would take, if you so choose to do this, we would take the money that you push our way, we would incorporate it into the Transportation Alternatives Program, administer it through that program as it stands now. Now we have the structure there to really think through the program and to administer the funds that came in. What I would share with the committee is that with the rapid growth from the federal government and with some extra funds that would potentially come from the state, we aren't staffed to do that. So we would be in the business of hiring some consultants to help us out and to administer the money. A lot of this would go not really to items on our system. They would go to municipalities and to counties. And so we would, in that case, we would push the money to them, but still would be responsible for the successful completion of that program prior to the date set in the bill, which I believe is 2028. So, Mr. Chairman, that's I don't see any issues with us administrating the program if you so choose to pass it, and certainly would execute the program and evaluate proposals that will come in from communities and counties and across the state in accordance with the guidance that's laid out in the bill, because it's actually fairly direct about, hey, here's how you're going to prioritize it. I would anticipate that we would probably stand up a separate selection committee for this program versus the one that we have with the existing one, the transportation alternatives, because I think there's a different focus. Obviously, the monies would not be commingled because I think there's going to be reports due to this body about how we would spend a potential $10 million if you so choose to pass. Mr. Chairman, that's probably a quick summary of where we're at pending questions.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Director Reinen. So in the packet that we received, it looks a little different from the one during the interim. If I remember correctly, and maybe it was just an email attachment during the interim, but there was a list of priority projects that were identified throughout the state that were ranked from, high to low, so to say. And I remember my own community being in one of the higher areas. So I guess my concern and my question is if this funding were allocated, would those projects changed since the interim, or do they remain the same? Again, I don't see them in the packet.
Director Reiner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative, is this the form that you're talking about? Okay. So this is actually, thank you, Mr. Mina, is that this is his. This list would not change for us. But remember that this would be crosswalks on YDOT system, not necessarily crosswalks on other people's system. And so I would say that this list stands. But the way we would anticipate administering this program would be community or, political entity. If you're interested, submit an application. There is a 25% match required in the bill. And so I would anticipate that we would not automatically go from this list, although this list would certainly factor into the discussion once applications are received.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Reiner. And so earlier you mentioned there would be a new committee that would be formed with that current list of prioritized high-risk areas, crosswalks throughout the state of Wyoming. Would that new committee take that list into consideration? That's my first question. Second question, kind of a little further upstream. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about YDOT's relationship with planning and zoning entities, specifically within counties and municipalities, when they're building new subdivisions. What's your relationship like when it comes to their approval for subdivisions and creating safe routes to schools?
Director Reiner.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, let me start with the first question about a new committee. So I think it's probably important in this context to think about process and to think about guidance from this body. So we do have a current committee that analyzes our transportation alternative program applications that typically occurs in the spring of the year. And I think the timelines in the packet that we submitted to you. The reason, and so that evaluates bike paths, and typically bike paths is really where we've spent most of that money. So Greenway here in Cheyenne, Parkway and Casper and other familiar type items like that across the state. The concept of a new or different committee, I think, is to broaden the scope a bit. I'd like to invite schools to participate in analysis of this bill because of the origins of this. And I'd also like to invite some legislatures to sit on that committee so that we sort of broaden the scope of who sits on that committee. And it would be a separate committee to administer whatever dollars that this body would choose to send to YDOT.
So
So that
Director,
I would,
the YDOT projects that are currently the TAP committee has prioritized, will those be impacted by passage of this bill, or will those still be a standalone item?
Mr. Chairman, they would not be affected. So that's a separate pot of money that has different selection criteria than would be laid out here. And so I think that goes back, Representative Rodriguez Williams, to your question about the list that you saw. That list was certainly defined sort of by our risk analysis based on average daily traffic and some other items that Mr. Mina could walk you through. It was not prioritized based on the guidance that's in this bill, which is very specifically that says the department shall prioritize the expenditure. And this is on page 3, starting in line 15. It lays out how we will prioritize this, which is not how we prioritize the list that we had during the interim. And so to me, there's two different systems there. So if you look at, item A, the first priority is a crosswalk where a fatality has occurred within the last 2 years. And then line 22, item B, crosswalks where an injury or other accident occurred within the last 2 years. And so I think the task before us then is prioritization of projects that come in. First, you got to apply. Second, you got to, say, hey, we have 25% match according to the current guidance in the bill. And the other body, it was 10%. What that was one of the reasons that's engrossed is it was changed from 10 to 25% in terms of match. And then you flip over to page 4, line 2, item C, any other school crosswalk where the department determines there's a need. So I think that the very specific criteria laid out in this bill may modify this. And we have not done that analysis.
Director Reiner, how many school crosswalks do we have in the state where there has been a fatality in the last 2 years?
Mr. Chairman, what Mr. Mina says is 1, and that would be here in Cheyenne.
Thank you. Other questions for Director Reiner? Thank you to the YDOT team. Appreciate you being here this morning. Cold, windy day. Anyone else in the room wishing to discuss Senate File 35? Counties? Good morning. Did you wake up when you walked outside this morning?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, and I'm joined by a county commissioner from Park County, Mr. Lee Livingston, and appreciate the opportunity to speak on this bill really quickly. We are in support of this legislation. As has been referenced, we are responsible for a considerable amount of the transportation system in our state. Not a whole lot of crosswalks or such on county roads, but still of interest for us. This is an issue that's also very close to me as an individual. My boys go to the school that fatality happened. And unfortunately, I was there that morning, dropping them off with one of their friends. Miss Jones, who I don't see in the room today, is a very incredible woman. In fact, every morning she's out there helping kids across that crosswalk where her son was hit. It pains me to see her have to go through that daily, but it's become a family for her, and I really appreciate her dedication and commitment to that. As you went through the interim, part of the conversation and the transition to this particular concept was that you really wanted to be proactive rather than reactive through penalties. And that's what this really represents, is an opportunity for us to invest in safe routes for schools. I really hope that this is the first investment that we make in this particular area. We have an issue here in Cheyenne, but there are a lot of other issues out there. There's a reference to the accident that happened in Lander. I think you've heard testimony in previous conversations about one in Cody where a young man was struck. I believe we even had another fatality in Rock Springs in the not too distant past. So we do have an issue in our state. With that, we stand in support of this. And again, I've got a commissioner here that has some experience in this space from his community, and you might want to offer some comments too.
Please do.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Lee Livingston, Park County Commissioner, and as the good Representative Rodriguez Williams mentioned, we have one of those critical crossings right in our community. Our kids from the middle school are having to cross a 5-lane, very busy thoroughfare through our city. And we would urge the movement passing of this bill and hope some of the funding could help alleviate that situation before, we have one of those statistics with one of our kids. Thank you very much.
Questions for the Commissioner? Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this goes to either one of you, and I meant to ask the director as well, and it might be just out of your wheelhouse, but what I'm interested in is, do you have a thought about this 25% match of funds as far as any communities that might struggle to meet that, right? So, I mean, my concern is I always appreciate community buy-in, but I would hate for us to set a bar where the poor communities can't afford for us to provide a safer route for children, only the communities that can afford it. So if you have any thought or comment on that.
Mr. Raymond.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Oakley, I think it's a wonderful question, and I too appreciate the idea of community buy-in. I was just trying to pull up a document really quickly, and I should be there just shortly. And what I was trying to pull up is how much counties in particular have in their county road fund, to give you a sense of how difficult it may be for some communities to put that forward. And I have, diesel fuel taxes that will go towards, this issue statewide, $16 million statewide. And remember, we manage or own at least 50% or more of all roads in this state. So more than any other entity combined. That's on the diesel side. On the county gasoline tax, it's another $10 million. So, and another 15 for the county road construction maintenance program. So $45 million total across this state. And I could give you county by county, but some of your communities are really operating on a shoestring in order to do that. Now, with these pathways to school, the schools certainly could perhaps step in, the municipalities and other partners, but I'm not going to suggest what their budgets look like, but at least on the county side, it's a stretch for some of these communities.
Further questions? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at that same amendment that came from the Senate side and wondering, we have the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund that we use to fund awesome projects across the state. And we have private entities that bring in funds for those projects. And so I imagine it would benefit you if we allowed for that, because here what it's saying is any basically political or government entity needs to be involved. And maybe you could speak to if you have private businesses or folks in your communities that would be willing to donate or to help contribute to that 25% match.
Mr. Raymond.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I do know we have a lot of support. I couldn't put a monetary value on it, but I know that our families and our businesses are very much aware of this situation. And I know there's a lot of support to get at least the crossing there in Cody moved forward.
Representative Rodriguez Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Commissioner Livingston. I guess my concern is 10 million can only go so far. And I've seen that priority list. And my community is on it. And my fear is being left out. What if, this new committee is formed and my community's dropped to the bottom? And we don't get a piece of it, even though our county applies. And I'm just curious if you have that same concern.
Commissioner Livingston.
Chairman and Representative, I do have that concern. I'm only one of 5, as you know, but I have a strong feeling about the sentiments of my fellow board members, and we would do whatever we could to make sure that our local project receives the attention it deserves.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you this morning. Others in the room wishing to testify on Senate File 35? Anybody on Zoom land for 35? Nobody there? Nobody else in the room? I'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Oakley, second by Provenza. Discussion. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to make some amendments. So on the engrossed copy, page 4, lines 16 and 17, my proposed amendment is going to be to take 25 down to 15% split somewhere. We originally had 10. They went up to 25. My proposal is to take that down to 15%. So whatever conforming language.
We have a second.
Second.
Second by Provenza. That'll be a clear. Page 4, line 16 and 17, drop 25 to 15. You have that? All right. Committee discussion on the amendment.
Question.
All in favor of Representative Oakley's amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
And that amendment passes. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose an amendment lining with my comments earlier. I think what we could do is, so page 4 is it's in a couple places, so we'll have to do conforming changes with it. But on page 4, starting with after political subdivision, insert a comma.
Which line are you on page?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, 15. On line 15 or any other entity of the state or private funds. Unless we see a different way that might be better. So it might be. I would go after subdivision. Okay, so after subdivision, comma, private funds. Insert private funds there, and then the rest of the line continues or any others. Private funds, donations. So private funds, comma, sorry. And then continues on after that with or any other entity of the state participating in the grant program.
Okay, so your intent is to allow private donations to perhaps reach that 15% match?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Debbie, you have that? Committee, we clear on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment?
Second.
Seconded by Oakley.
Question.
Question on the amendment. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The amendment passes. Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my proposed amendment, bottom of page 3 on lines 22 and 23, as well as What's that? As also top of page 4 on line 3, my proposal is going to take this up to 5 years, where a fatality has occurred within the last 5 years and where an injury or accident has occurred within the last 5 years. We had a child killed in Riverton. It seems like it was yesterday. I'm not sure. Probably within the last 5 years, but we just heard testimony like there was one fatality. So I just think that's too restrictive. If we have some place where a child's been killed in the last 5 years, I think we need to be looking at that. So I think that is an important broadening of the sort of the guidance that we're statutorily giving here. So that's the amendment.
Is there a second on the amendment? Second by Provenza. Discussion on the amendment. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think that makes sense, particularly given that, this could take a while and I don't want folks like Representative Rodriguez Williams to time out of this if something were to happen. So this is a lengthy process. I think it makes sense to kind of operate in that longer time span.
Any other discussion? Members, well, I was on add my little comment on there and then we'll do question. Just that this bill grew out of the discussion of the tragedy here in Cheyenne. And I think the idea was to prioritize that particular crosswalk for these funds, but not exclude others. And that whether we're dealing with overpasses or tunnels or signage or those sorts of things, might get a variety of projects, but the purpose of the bill was to really try to do something about that particular crosswalk as well as other crosswalks. So I'm a little concerned that the 5-year span might, again, 10 million is only going to go so far. Hopefully this is not the last that the legislature will do to try and improve school crosswalks, but probably the last coming out of Judiciary, and future would probably come out of transportation. So other discussion on the amendment, Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate that. I do, but we're talking about, obviously, it's a huge deal when we're talking about children's lives, and just out of Fremont County having again a child killed in a crosswalk, and then one in Lander hit and severely injured. I think my community is every bit as important. That's what we'll have to do, is balance it, but I think a broader look is warranted.
Representative Oakley, is it clear to you when the clock starts ticking on those last 2 years? Is it the effective date of the bill? Or is it whenever the projects get approved? Because we could time out the intersection, the crosswalk that we were most concerned about over the interim might get timed out if we're, down the road before the clock starts ticking. So is the language in the bill clear as to when those last 2 years counts?
Mr. Chairman, I guess it's perhaps not perfectly clear, although we are just talking about a priority list for a committee to look at. And I think it will fairly open it up for them to look at all of the deaths that have, or injuries that have occurred. That's my 2 cents.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So looking on page 4, the last lines 19 and 20, projects for school crosswalks shall be completed not later than June 30th, 2028. So I guess that, there's issue there. So it has to be within a certain time frame, and the projects, given the length of time that it takes to do them, will have to be probably in that last 2 to 3 years, I suppose.
Representative Chestick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that the starting date would be the effective date of the bill. There's nothing else that limits this to, because there's no language saying when the clock starts, it has to start when the bill starts, and that starts on when it becomes effective. It's immediately effective. So I think it's 2 years from the day we pass the bill, or the day the governor signs the bill, would be my interpretation. Or 5 years, whatever the limit is, would start from the day the governor signs the bill.
Okay, any other discussion or amendments on this bill, Representative Oakley?
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, thank you. But so even given this discussion, if, again, I don't tend to think that the committee would be so pigeonholed, but if they are, and we go with that interpretation that they can't look at it except after this goes into effect, if you will, that's certainly more reason to broaden this number.
No further discussion. All those in favor of Representative Oakley's amendment to extend the time frame on page 3 and top of page 4 to 5 years, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The amendment has passed. Any further amendments? Any Representative Harrelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just discussion. So Platte County had an incident as well, actually. We had cross-country running team. And so one of the things I want to talk about is, I mean, what happened here and what's happened around the state is horrible. Obviously, anytime anyone gets hit in a crosswalk or on a street is a horrible thing. One of the things that I think we need to also have a conversation about, and I like what Director you said, that there's education, there's enforcement, there's engineering. Obviously, this isn't a one trick. I mean, we could engineer all day long and idiotic situations can happen. And this is a situation where the conversation came down to, why are we running right at sunrise, a cross-country team across the busiest basically road in town? Why are we doing that? Let's be intelligent here, because the student that got struck, granted, was in a crosswalk, but this guy's driving down the road, the sun's on a dirty windshield, and next thing you know, there's a student flying across the road. And that's, was it the driver's fault for striking a student? Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the driver's always has to be in understanding that they're in control of their vehicle. Every person in this room would have struck that student, because how do you know? And so I think that we have to have that education point piece. And I thank you for putting that video out. I truly do. The other day I slammed on the brakes for a student that walked across the road in the middle of the day, not at a crosswalk, looking at their cell phone. Well, what do we do about that? Let's build an overpass. Well, we can't always build an overpass. There has to be that education piece. So I appreciate that. Is this the answer? I don't know. I mean, I'm glad to hear that there is more money already thrown into the budget than there has been in the past for these situations. I just, with the $10 million appropriation, this is a bill that I'm not going to be supporting today. Not that I don't care about these kids, not that I don't care about these crosswalks. I just think that there comes a point too where I don't know. I think that it's something that needs to be brought in a budget with a kind of an idea of, hey, we have these issues. These are the places that we can fix, and we're going to bring this in the budget. So that's kind of more a direction I would like to see. I believe probably a better direction than this, but obviously for protecting our kids, also for educating our kids, because it seems like anymore there's an issue. I saw a deal the other day where they're putting signs on sidewalks now, because that's where kids are looking. I mean, so we got to have the education piece.
Okay. No further discussion. Let's call the roll on Senate File 35 as amended.
Representative Cragel,
He left an aye vote.
Representative Chestick,
Aye.
Representative Harrelson, Representative Jennings, Representative Nemec,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Rodriguez Williams,
Aye.
Chairman Washut.
Aye.
We have 7 ayes and 2 noes.
And one of our committee members that maybe hasn't carried a bill this session, want to carry one for us on the floor?
Do it, Tony.
Representative Nemec. Thank you. Senate File 129, Senate File 129. We'll be working off the engrossed version. So members, this is a bill brought by the chairman of Senate Judiciary. The purpose here is to meet statutory requirements for authorizing the governor and the governor's office to conduct background checks on employees and interns and applicants for employment. Without statutory authorization, it creates an impediment for the office of the governor to screen these individuals. And in this day and age, it's becoming increasingly important to know about the background. We've had lots of discussions about criminal backgrounds this session. But that's basically what this bill is all about, is to give that statutory authorization for the background checks to be conducted by the governor's office for their employees, interns, and applicants for employment. Nothing more complicated than that. So, discussion on the bill? Question being called?
No, that's the
Oh,
question.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but I'm just curious if you know why it was so narrow to just the governor's office, like versus the executive branch. I just kind of the nexus of it.
Representative Rodriguez, it's my understanding that most agencies that do background checks are already included in having that authorization. And it was always assumed that the governor, being the chief executive, had the authority to request background checks. Just to make it abundantly clear, statutory changes are being requested. And I think the short answer is the other agencies are probably already covered. Further discussion on the bill. Representative Chestic.
Just a question. On line, page 2, line 18. Is there a definition someplace of confidential information? What some people think is confidential may be different than what other people think is confidential information. So just asking a question.
The man with the answer has just walked through the front door. Senator, you want to come forward? We just opened your bill. Timing is perfect.
What bill are we on?
So I provided the committee with a brief overview, but we certainly welcome your explanation as to why this bill is coming forward now. And then I think Representative Chestic has a question for you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's good to see everyone. We just finished up across the hall, so I'm glad the timing was okay to stop by and just say a few words about this background check bill. This came to us from the executive branch. It's a practice that we used to have up until about 4 or 5 years ago. And following an audit of our federal partners out there, they indicated that there really wasn't any statutory framework to allow for the governor's office to receive this kind of information or to conduct these background checks, to request a background check. This little bill allows for, and you might notice, I hope you have in front of you an amendment that we put on committee of the whole. One of the good senators and I wanted to make sure we had this tightened down to be only for the background checks in the case of a hiring situation for the executive office. We didn't want this to go outside the bounds in any way. So that amendment, I think, tightened the bill down, and it simply reflects the opportunity for the executive office to do a background check when they're doing some hiring A lot of sensitive information comes across in the governor's office. Access to a lot of different things. Just a good idea, I think, to give them the opportunity to do some checking before they bring somebody on board. And that's really the 30,000-foot view on the bill and why we brought it. Mr. Chairman, be glad to try to answer any questions. I don't know if the governor's office is here, and I'd sure.
Please come forward.
Yeah, if you're good with it.
Representative Shestak, you had a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Landon, it's a quick question for you, and maybe the other witness can answer as well. So this, one of the guardrails is for what purposes is information being sought? Is for employment, for persons who would have access to confidential information. I'm just wondering if there's a definition of what confidential information is, because that can be be broadly interpreted or narrowly interpreted, and I just wonder if it's defined anywhere.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, and Representative, I'm going to lean on counsel here to the right to maybe help me answer that one.
Please state your name for the record and please answer the question.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Betsy Anderson, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and General Counsel for Governor Gordon. So I did want to thank you for considering this bill, and for you and Senator Landon putting this forward. Representative Chestik, there is no definition of confidential information. It is something I looked at. It is used elsewhere in the bill for ETS and their ability to do background checks. The type of information that our office have, a lot of it deals with security. We get a lot of information from the state troopers and Division O that help protect the governor and the first family. We do have international visitors, federal visitors. A lot of times information about their visits is confidential. And so that's additional type of information. And then also a lot of our policy advisors do represent agencies that receive confidential information. And so that they then kind of get that information through those agencies. So it would be important for them to keep that information confidential. And to Senator Landon's comment, yes, in the past, prior administrations did background checks. But one of the reasons we need this in statute is that you cannot perform the national background check without FBI. And actually, once this gets put in statute, they will then look at the statute and determine if they approve the authority of them to do the background check. So we've got another step even after if this was to pass. And that's what happened a few years ago was the DCI got audited by the FBI, and the FBI said, no, you don't have the authority to do this. So they did stop doing them at that point in time. But that would be the purpose and why we think we need that.
Further questions? Senator, you want to bring us home?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do appreciate Ms. Anderson being here to help us kind of explain the bill. There are a lot of entities in state government, including where you and I worked, where we have the capability of doing a fingerprint background check, particularly for our child care unit up there at the college where I spent many of my years. It just makes sense to me that in an office like the governor's office, this is a good consideration for us to at least put it on the list. I don't know that it would ever prohibit or keep the governor from hiring someone, but certainly there are some positions I think it just makes sense. So thanks for considering the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room wishing to testify on Senate File 129? Anybody on Zoom? On closed public comment committee, what's your preference? Move the bill by Provenza, second by Craigo. Discussion on the bill, amendments. Saying none, Debbie, you want to call the roll?
Representative Craigo. Representative Chestik.
Aye.
Representative Haroldson. Representative Jennings. Representative Nemec.
Aye.
Representative Oakley.
Aye.
Representative Provenza. Representative Rodriguez Williams,
Aye.
Chairman Washut.
Aye.
We have 8 ayes and 1 no.
With that, Senate File 129 is passed House Judiciary. Go to the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you and appreciate the committee's work throughout the session. Sorry, I haven't been able to stop in more often. Somehow we've got to maybe rectify that so that our two committees are not meeting at the same time. I've tried to watch from afar and all I get is a sheet that I can see what's going on, but thank you for all your hard work.
And I'll carry this bill on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
With that, we're done for the day.
So sorry.